Hello and welcome to another Three Wells podcast. Today we are talking about cannabis and how not to or should you avoid the disorientation, psychoactivity, aka getting high with cannabis. And if you want to avoid it, we'll be talking about how to do that. Now, with us today, and I guess I should introduce myself first. I'm Jason Turner, co-founder and CMO here at Three Wells, and I'll be the host for today. More excitingly, we have Dr. Debbie Malka with us, and I'm sure you've seen by now quite a few of her videos that are all at Three Wells. And Debbie, just in case somebody out there hasn't seen your videos or seen your introduction yet, why don't you give us a quick intro on your background?
Hi, yeah. Well, I have been associated with Three Wells for about 3 years now as their chief medical advisor. And I came on board to help promote content that helps consumers learn how to use cannabis and CBD in a medically productive way. And that's been my focus for the past 15 years as a clinical cannabis specialist. I had a private practice where I focused on cannabis medicine in Central Coast of California, but now I have moved to New Mexico and I'm just doing telemedicine and phone consults. But I have seen about 35,000 patients myself, and I can probably really talk about how people are using cannabis medically. So I'm happy to be here.
Great. Every time I've heard your background, I don't know how many times, and every time I still find it impressive. So I'm glad you're here. I'm glad we get to have this conversation today. So as I mentioned, we're going to be talking about the avoiding or not doing or making the choice, I guess, really of not going into an altered state or feeling the psychoactive effects of cannabis. Not to say that you shouldn't, but we have so many people at Three Wells, our users and our consumers of content that say that they don't want to get high. They actually want the other benefits of cannabis, which we'll talk about. So why don't we talk about, first and foremost, this notion of getting high, not getting high, and you're saying avoiding the psychoactive effects. What are your thoughts on that, Debbie? Just to ground us in your initial thinking.
So cannabis gained a lot of popularity in this country in the counterculture as a recreational, illegal substance. And in that context, from the 1970s to about 2000 or 2010 in some states, or maybe 2015 in other states, the main impetus for consumers was to find something they could smoke that would get them high, because they didn't know what else to do with cannabis. Since cannabis has become recognized as a medical substance since about 2000 and ongoing, there are so many effects that cannabis has that to restrict it to the goal of getting high really does it a disservice. And so in medical cannabis, we like to talk about the effects of THC, which is the psychoactive component in cannabis. We like to talk about it as psychoactive or as disorienting. One workshop presenter was infamous for saying, I don't know why people have such an objection to the effects of THC. What's wrong with euphoria? And so we use terms like that. Instead of high, we use euphoria. And I think that's part of the switch from marijuana to cannabis, and from cannabis just for fun to cannabis as medicine, is to kind of not focus on the high aspects, but the myriad of effects that are potentially possible.
So to put a fine point on it, just in case someone out there has never taken any sort of cannabis, when we say high or euphoria, can you describe that state quickly and what that feels like?
Well, first of all, there's lots of different kinds of cannabis. But if you're talking about the effects of the THC-rich cannabis, you're definitely going to feel some of the effects of THC on your mind. Is a shift in perception, being altered. Most of the time, this being altered for brand new people does not come across as feeling great. The first few times, you do not feel euphoric, you do not feel high, you do not feel great, you feel disoriented and you feel uncomfortable, maybe even paranoid. So it's really important to understand that to get to that effect of THC where it actually lifts your spirits, it actually takes an adjustment time. So brand new people who use TH-rich cannabis for the first time are not going to feel great. They're going to feel weird. They're going to feel off. So that is the downside. But as you develop a tolerance and get used to the effects, it starts to feel better. And you feel, your mood is sharper and has more connectivity. There's more perceptions. And so it gives you a shift. And very often it's a welcome shift, but not always.
Okay. So before we had our discussion today, I mentioned to a few people that I know, hey, we're going to be talking about, not feeling the disorientation, the psychoactive effects of cannabis. And a few of them, and admittedly, they were more of the new people to cannabis. They said, how is that even possible? That's not even cannabis if you're not getting high. That's just part of it. So I can argue from a layman's point of view that that's not right. But what are your thoughts on how would you respond to that?
Well, first of all, Free Wells usually covers the whole spectrum of medicinal components that come from the cannabis plant, ranging anywhere from barely any THC, which comes from hemp plants, so that you're getting mostly CBD, to plants that have differing percentages of THC. So it's all cannabis. It's just that legally, it's defined that if the plant has less than 0.3% THC by weight, that's defined as hemp. But anything from 0.3% to 100%, which is not possible, but is cannabis. So there's lots of forms of cannabis with lots of components. Some of the strains have a lot of THC. Some have a mix of THC and CBD. Some strains are now having other cannabinoids that are being grown for their non-psychoactive effects, such as strains that are high in CBG, cannabigerol. So there's lots of different kinds of cannabis plants. It's all cannabis. And to answer your question about how to get the effects without getting altered very much, for one thing, the tolerance to the effects of THC is something that happens with ongoing use. But also, there's so many products out there that mix up the cannabinoids for you, that have a mix of THC and CBD, or THC and THC acid, THCA. And these generally do not bring on the same psychoactive effects as high THC products. So right now, the average consumer can go into a dispensary and find a whole ton of products. And I would say anyone is safe with to not being altered by getting a product that has 20 to 25% THC and the other cannabinoids making up 75 to 80%, which is available.
So
that's a trick that we use to mix them.
That 25%, no more, is that what you're saying?
Some people can get away with a 50-50 mix, but most people haven't built a tolerance to THC, should stick more with the 25% THC range. So that still gives you some effects of THC, but you won't feel altered. So that's the main thing. And the other main thing, of course, is that there are some products out there that use unheated cannabis. Unheated. Did you ever wonder why people over the centuries have smoked the cannabis flower? Kind of strange. And why don't they, just chew up the leaves? And that's because when you smoke it, that's what turns the THC acid into THC. So raw cannabis has no THC. It's all THC acid, which is not psychoactive. And there are some products out there that are extracted with a cold extract process, and they won't have any THC in them.
Will they still give the same medicinal effects without the euphoria?
Nope. Nope. So the cannabinoid acids are good for several things, and they're really good for several things, and they're way underutilized, but they're not the same things as THC or CBD. So, for example, THC acid is a strong, and I'll just give you 3 or 4. Strong anti-inflammatory, strong immune modulator, strong muscle relaxant, and it's also good as a anticonvulsant. So you find it like in some kids who use cannabis for seizure control, you'll find THC acid in some of those formulations. CBD acid is similar, but it's not as good at seizure control. And it does have stronger indications for anti-nausea even than CBD. So there are 3 or 4 things that the cannabinoid acids are really good for. But for example, the big reason that people use THC, even if they don't want to get stoned, is for sleep. And there is no other cannabinoid replacement for THC that's as good at sleep. And I should also say about THC, so the 3 or 4 big reasons people use it is for pain control, for sleep, for the psychoactive effects, and it's a strong immune modulator. So if you want to treat pain, you're going to want some THC in your mix. If you want to sleep, you're going to want some THC in your mix. Okay. And then CBD, of course, that's really good for anxiety and relaxation, even muscle relaxation, mind relaxation, calming. It's also a strong anti-inflammatory. It's good for inflammatory pain, but that's because it decreases inflammation. So if you want to achieve those effects, you don't need any THC at all. So pretty much you got to put in your 25% to 50% of THC in your mix if you want pain help, sleep help, and altered perception.
So is it to get that product? So I'm talking about, you're talking about eating or consuming raw, not smoked, not heated. And I think it's called decarboxylation, right? When you heat the cannabis up to burn off the acid and just have THC. So if I walked into a dispensary and I bought flour, bag or jar or whatever, are you saying eat that? And that way there's no heating up, no THC, it's all THCA?
Yeah, the problem with eating raw flour is that it gives you indigestion because there's little spicules that irritate your stomach lining. So people generally don't eat raw flour. So what they've done, the 2 major home remedy ways of getting the acid component, like a tea, and cannabis tea is mostly THC acid. When you boil the water, it's not high enough to actually decarboxylate, but it does dissolve some of the THC acid into the tea. And that's a remedy they've used in the Netherlands a lot. And the other home method is to grind it like in a wheatgrass juicer and make some fresh raw cannabis juice, which doesn't taste good. It's bitter. Usually they put other vegetables in. But those are the 2 ways that people at home can get their cannabis acid. They also sell lots of products now with THC acid. You'll find it on topicals. You find it in tinctures. I don't know how many edibles, but some, especially in California. So it's taken about 10 years for it to kind of get utilized by a wider audience. But back in the old days, a joint remedy came up from Mexico where they soaked the leaves in rubbing alcohol and rubbed it on sore joints. And that's also THC acid because they never heated the alcohol. As a matter of fact, when I was first in practice and people were putting tinctures on dispensary shelves, not everybody heated them. They didn't know they had to. So a lot of the tinctures that got sold were actually cold extract alcohol tincture mixes, and whatever good they were doing from the THC acid.
So if someone goes into a store, and it was good to know, eating raw cannabis as is can make your stomach upset. What should they look for on the label of the different products? Should they be looking for THC acid versus THC? Anything else they should be looking for to get where I'm going with it is two parts, really. What should someone be looking for, THC versus THC acid in a product? And two is the entourage effect, which is all the other cannabinoids combined together to have, a wonderful overall effect. Is entourage effect still part of this, and should people be looking for that? So I guess all of that coalesces to what should we look for?
So my favorite products are full spectrum extracts, they're called. Full spectrum means that the extraction process extracts all the cannabinoids from the plant and all the terpenes from the plant. Not all extraction processes do that. There's partial spectrum, there's broad spectrum, there's purified cannabinoids that they sell where they add the terpenes back. So the best entourage is what nature provides, and that's in the full spectrum extract. Unfortunately, not many products are going to say that. Some products, if we're lucky, are going to give a terpene content, and those are the best. Because if they don't give you the terpene content, then you really don't know the effects of all of the wonderful terpenes. For example, if you use a THC and you don't know which terpenes it has, it can either be stimulating or sedating. And if you want it for sleep, you want to know that it has the terpenes that are sedating. And some product sales will call it an indica in that case, but they might not be correct. So it's really good if you can get some terpenes listed on the product. If you can't, you just have to go by what the company says, whether it's an indica, which is sedating, or a sativa, which is stimulating. But they all should give the cannabinoid content. That's a common thing. And they'll put the THC on there, the CBD. Sometimes there's CBN, which is a breakdown product of THC. They might put down THC acid. That's THCA. They might have some CBD acid, which is CBDA. And more frequently, there are some products that are coming out with CBG, which we mentioned before, cannabigerol, which is not psychoactive. So you just need to, look on the label. I have found that tinctures usually give the widest diversity of cannabinoid content and terpene content in general. Because when you cook cannabis, like to make an edible, very often the temperatures are so high from the cooking that the terpenes are evaporated. So you'll just get cannabinoids then.
So could I walk into a dispensary and say to the salesperson or bud tender, whichever term people want to use in their local dispensary, and say, I'm looking for a cold extract, full spectrum product? Would most of them look at me like, okay, yeah, I got you, or I have no idea what you just said? Or is that even the right thing to ask for?
You'd have to be in a select advanced dispensary contingent, possibly, on the coast of California, in Los Angeles and San Francisco, somewhere where they actually have been exposed to a diversity of products for a long enough time for that to be part of the language. a lot of places that really focus on selling flour, they're going to look at you like you're crazy. And people should keep in mind that the full raw flour is a full spectrum product because nothing's been taken out of it. You can always count on full flour to have the full component that came from the plant. That's always full spectrum. And that's why a lot of people use full flour because, you know, they get used to a certain variety that gives you certain effects and nothing is taken out of it, so they can count on it from time to, you know, time and time again.
So is that the same?
There are some.
Sorry, go ahead.
There are some companies that actually do say that on their label. Full spectrum, cold extracted product. Rare few, but I've seen it. But it's rare.
So it sounds to me, you know, from a layman's perspective, the best, easiest thing to do is go buy flour, go in and ask for, if you want to relax an indica, if you want to be energized, a sativa, get flour, make your own tea, and then it's pretty simple and straightforward. And you could try asking for the cold extract full spectrum, but highly unlikely you're going to get exactly what you need. Is that the best way to approach this?
Again, I would say that I found the most diversity in tinctures. And a lot of dispensaries carry a diversity of tinctures that have a cannabinoid mix, and they say so on the label. And they say, they may or may not say, you know, the terpene content, but they may say full spectrum. And then they'll list the main cannabinoids. That's great. That's as good as you're going to get.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
I mean, they do even sell some varieties of flour that have a combination of THC and CBD, but that's hard to find. But they are there. I've even told some patients to get a CBD rich flour and a THC rich flour and mix them together themselves to make a 50-50 mix or a 3-to-1 mix, or that's totally doable.
Okay. So try the tinctures, see what you can get. Let's say we did make tea. How much, to make a normal pot of tea, how much flour would a consumer need to buy and then turn into a tea?
Well, that's not a straightforward answer. It depends on how you make your tea. So pretty much 1 bud for a cup of tea is a good rule of thumb. However, if you want to increase your extraction of the available cannabinoids, there's a really fancy tea recipe that puts some cream or half and half or butter even into the water. And that fat content will also extract more cannabis, because cannabis, you know, is more dissolvable in fat than in water, the cannabinoids. So, you know, you could actually use less flour and more butter to get the same amount in your cup of tea. It's a science, actually. But you can look up tea recipes online, cannabis tea. There's a whole bunch of recipes.
Well, I'll grab one and then we'll post the link with this podcast. And that's all new. I didn't know butter and tea and extracting the cannabinoids. That's a great tip.
Yeah, well, pretty much every kind of cooking way that you can do with cannabis has been done and written about somewhere already.
Okay.
Yeah.
Now, if I guess the kind of the last big question I have for you. Let's say I went out and I didn't get something with THC in it. You know, it was the flower, and it was full spectrum. Would that show up in a drug test?
Yeah, the problem is that even with hemp plants, which have less than 0.3% THC, there is 0.3% THC most likely, and that will show up in a blood test. And I shouldn't say a blood test because nobody does blood tests. They do urine tests. And the urine test tests for 11-hydroxy THC, which is a metabolite. And depending upon how much you've had in your system, that could be coming out for days to weeks. So even if that's why it makes such a poor driving test thing. Because you could have had THC 2 days ago and still have a positive urine test, even though you're no longer being influenced, because it's a breakdown product of THC that they test for in the urine. Yeah, so the only way to avoid that is to get a pure CBD, 100% CBD product, or 100% CBDA product. I don't think there's any such thing as 100% THCA product, because some small percentage of that THCA will be, getting broken down and oxidized to THC, just because that's what happens with storage. So that may show up on a drug test.
Okay. Well,
Yeah.
Is there any last comments on avoiding the euphoria, psychoactivity of cannabis?
Yeah, people should keep in mind, again, that when they use topical cannabis, that generally doesn't get into your central nervous system, so that you can use full-on, straight-on, high-dose THC and you won't feel it in your head. So that's a really good way to get pain relief on localized areas, without affecting your perception. So topical is never psychoactive.
Great. Thank you. So,
Yeah,
Debbie, as always, a wealth of knowledge and clear perspective and direction. I appreciate that. And I understand you've actually put all this into a book, and I think it's oriented toward education, but tell us quickly about that. It sounds really interesting.
Yeah. That was a labor of commitment. I can't say love, but I worked on this great, big, comprehensive medical textbook called Medicinal Cannabis, Pearls for Clinical Practice, which just got released as of December 2021. And I'm currently involved in trying to arrange the first medical cannabis elective to be taught in medical school, in my local medical school, and using this book as a textbook. And we'll see how it goes from there, because really the sad fact is that people like me who are medical cannabis specialists are disappearing. The more states that decriminalize and approve adult use cannabis, the less use there is being made of medical specialists in cannabis, because people aren't coming to see us because they don't have to. And so it becomes really important for a person's own healthcare provider to have some knowledge about medical cannabis so that people have somebody to talk to. And that's what I'm hoping will happen over the next 10 years, is that your average primary care doctor won't think of cannabis as a drug, but they'll think of it as a medicine and know something about it.
Well,
so that book is available like online, Amazon, for anybody who wants more detail than they ever wanted to know, it is available.
Well, we'll put a link to the book in this. And if anyone wants to get a hold of you, what's the best way to do that?
My email is malkadoc, MALKADOC, @gmail.com. And I'm happy to answer questions or hear comments. So that's probably the best way.
Great. Well, again, thank you so much, Debbie. As always, it was fantastic talking with you, and I appreciate your time.
It was a pleasure. Okay, stay safe out there.
You too. Take care.